At just 26 years old, Joseph Bonanno rose to become one of the most powerful mafia bosses in New York, ruling the underworld for over 3 decades. But unlike many of his contemporaries, Bonanno's story didn't end in a violent fall from power. Instead, he quietly slipped away into retirement, revealing the secrets of the American Mafia in a daring memoir. How did he manage to navigate the dangers of organized crime while avoiding the violent fates of those around him? Stay tuned as we uncover the untold story of Joe Bonanno, a criminal mastermind who played by his own rules. Joseph Bonanno's life was unlike almost any other mafia boss in history. He rose to power at the young age of 26, taking control of one of New York's most influential crime families. For over 3 decades, he operated with a level of discretion rarely seen among mob leaders, avoiding the common pitfalls that took down many of his peers, from assassinations on public streets to arrests for organized crime, drugs, or even tax evasion. Bonanno skillfully navigated the dangerous world of the mafia, building a vast criminal network while keeping a remarkably low profile. His story is one of both power and secrecy, a legacy that made him legendary within the mob and beyond. By 1968, Bonanno had decided to step back from his criminal empire, an almost unheard of feat. Most mafia leaders either met a violent end or were imprisoned for life. However, Bonanno not only walked away but did so under mysterious circumstances. During the 1960s, he had been implicated in a failed attempt to eliminate 2 powerful rivals, a move that nearly cost him everything. Shortly after, he disappeared for 19 months, later claiming he had been kidnapped, though many suspected he had orchestrated his own disappearance to avoid escalating tensions with other mob factions. Years after his retirement, Bonanno shocked the world by publishing an autobiography in 1983, laying bare some of the mafia's most guarded secrets. At the age of 78, he recounted his experiences leading one of New York's most formidable crime families, sharing insights into the hidden workings of organized crime in America. His book was a groundbreaking glimpse into the clandestine world of the mob, offering readers an insider's perspective on the violence, loyalty, and cunning that shaped the American Mafia. Joseph Bonanno's life was not just the story of a crime boss, but a narrative of survival and strategy in one of history's most dangerous professions. Joseph Bonanno's early years were shaped by a heritage rooted deeply in the culture of Sicily, particularly in the mafia-dominated town of Castellammarese del Golfo, where he was born on January 18, 1905. This small Sicilian town was the birthplace not only of Bonanno but also of other notable mafia figures, such as Joe Masuria of the Genovese crime family and Salvatore Maranzano, a significant boss in the Cosa Nostra. These powerful connections would ultimately influence the trajectory of Bonanno's life and his eventual rise in the American Mafia. The Bonanno family emigrated to the United States when Joseph was a young boy, settling in Brooklyn, New York. For nearly a decade, they built a life there, but in an unexpected turn, they returned to Sicily. It was during this time back in Italy that Bonanno encountered the Mafia for the first time and gained an understanding of its codes and operations. However, political tensions were on the rise, and Benito Mussolini's fierce campaign against organized crime forced many criminals to flee the country. In 1924, without legal documentation, a young Bonanno returned alone to the United States, where a different kind of opportunity awaited him in the bustling, Prohibition-era underworld of New York. At just 19, Bonanno aligned himself with Salvatore Maranzano's crew, quickly distinguishing himself in a world where knowledge was often overshadowed by brute strength. He was known among his peers as a man of education, someone who could recite Dante's Divine Comedy or quote from Machiavelli's The Prince. This intellectual streak set him apart from his associates, who, as Bonanno later noted, were rarely interested in literature or philosophical musings. In the chaotic environment of Prohibition, Bonanno's sharp mind and understanding of the Mafia's cultural codes helped him rise swiftly through the ranks. When conflicts erupted among New York's most powerful crime families, Bonanno capitalized on the turmoil to solidify his own position and prove himself as a strategic thinker and leader. Former NYPD detective Ralph Salerno later remarked that Bonanno was one of the people present at the creation of the whole thing, the American Mafia, underscoring his foundational role in shaping organized crime in America. Joseph Bonanno's early life set the stage for a career that would span decades and establish him as one of the most influential figures in mafia history, blending Sicilian tradition with American ambition to build a criminal empire. The Castellammarese War, an intense and bloody struggle within the Italian-American Mafia, became a pivotal moment for Joe Bonanno's rise in the criminal world. This fierce conflict, which took place from 1930 to 1931, saw two major factions battling for supremacy. On one side stood Joe the Boss Masuria, a powerful traditionalist who championed the old ways of the Sicilian Mafia. Opposing him was Salvatore Maranzano, a forward-thinking crime boss from Bonanno's hometown of Castellammarese del Golfo in Sicily. This battle between the old guard and the young bloods had deep implications for the Mafia's future, and Bonanno's involvement would set the stage for his own ascent. Bonanno, a loyal ally to Maranzano, served as his trusted enforcer throughout the conflict. He protected Maranzano's bootlegging operations and struck fear into rivals whenever necessary, helping to secure his mentor's interests in a time Bonanno later called the Golden Goose of Prohibition. His loyalty was rewarded as he gained valuable insights into the Mafia's workings, viewing his time under Maranzano as a crucial apprenticeship in the art of organized crime. The war itself, as Carl Sifakis describes in the Mafia Encyclopedia, symbolized a clash of ideologies. Masuria represented the old Sicilian customs, including unwavering loyalty to senior dons and strict adherence to ethnic exclusivity. He believed in conducting mafia business solely with Italian partners and expected the same respect from his underlings. His followers included some of the most notorious figures in mafia history, such as Charles Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, Carlo Gambino, Albert Anastasia, and Frank Costello, who would one day mentor Harlem's infamous Bumpy Johnson. In contrast, Maranzano's faction was composed of younger leaders who envisioned a more pragmatic approach to organized crime. They believed that allegiance should not be based purely on seniority, and they welcomed partners of other nationalities if it meant good business. This progressive mindset created a rift between those clinging to the past and those looking toward a more profitable, flexible future. After a year of ruthless bloodshed, key mafia leaders like Luciano and Genovese realized that the endless violence was bad for business. Secret negotiations ensued, and they struck a decisive deal with Maranzano. Luciano would arrange the assassination of Masuria, bringing an end to the costly war. True to his word, Luciano orchestrated Masuria's death on April 15, 1931, in a dramatic fashion. Masuria was shot while dining at Nuova Villa Tamaro, a restaurant on Coney Island, in an event that epitomized the Mafia's code of silence. No one witnessed the shooting, no one was convicted, and Luciano secured an unshakable alibi. With Masuria out of the way, the war ended, and Maranzano emerged as the undisputed leader. For Joe Bonanno, this victory opened the door to significant power and influence within the Mafia. As a loyal supporter of Maranzano's vision, Bonanno soon found himself positioned to claim his own legacy within the newly reorganized crime families, stepping confidently into the ranks of the American Mafia. After emerging victorious from the Castellammarese War, Salvatore Maranzano set out to restructure the entire Italian-American Mafia in New York, creating an organized and centralized power structure that would shape the future of organized crime. His vision was to divide the New York Mafia into 5 families, each controlled by a boss who would report to him as the supreme leader, the Capo di tutti I Capi, or boss of all bosses. Maranzano selected prominent crime leaders for this new order: Charles Lucky Luciano, Joseph Prophesai, Thomas Gagliano, Vincent Mangano, and himself. This new arrangement was intended to bring stability and prevent the deadly infighting that had characterized the previous years. Maranzano's reorganization introduced a formal hierarchy within each family, establishing a structured chain of command that included the boss, underboss, capo regime or capo, and soldiers, often called wise guys. However, Maranzano's reign as the ultimate authority over the 5 families was short-lived. On September 10, 1931, He was assassinated in his own office, shot and stabbed in a betrayal orchestrated by Luciano and his associates who felt threatened by Maranzano's ambition and lust for power. With Maranzano gone, a power vacuum was created, and Joe Bonanno, at just 26 years old, stepped up to inherit his former boss's place, becoming one of the youngest heads of a New York crime family. Luciano, now free of Maranzano's control, took charge of the entire mafia network and chose to preserve much of Maranzano's organized structure. However, rather than positioning himself as a dictatorial leader, he introduced a more democratic approach. Luciano created the Commission, a governing council composed of the leaders of each family. This council would function like a corporate board, where family bosses could discuss issues, resolve disputes, and avoid unnecessary bloodshed by voting on matters that might otherwise escalate into violence. Under Luciano's leadership, the mafia took on a more pragmatic outlook, focusing on profit and allowing members of various nationalities to participate in their enterprises, as long as they contributed to the organization's wealth. Joe Bonanno would later reflect on this period as one of unprecedented peace and cooperation among the families, writing that, for nearly 3 decades, the New York Mafia operated without major internal conflicts or external threats to his own family. However, this era of relative harmony would not last forever. The unity forged after the Castellammarese War was eventually tested as the next generation of mafia leaders brought their own ambitions and rivalries into the fold, setting the stage for conflicts that would challenge the very structure that Luciano had so carefully put in place. The Bonanno crime family, though relatively smaller than some of New York's other mafia factions, was a powerful and efficient operation under Joe Bonanno's leadership. With trusted underbosses Frank Garofalo and John Bonventura, Bonanno managed a diversified portfolio of illegal activities, from loan sharking and bookmaking to running numbers games, managing prostitution rings, and even investing in legitimate real estate ventures. This mix of illicit and legal enterprises helped the Bonanno family grow its influence while keeping its operations tightly knit and under the radar. One of Bonanno's biggest challenges stemmed from his immigration status. Having entered the United States illegally in 1924, he remained an undocumented immigrant for many years. To secure a legitimate presence in the country, he briefly left in 1938 with the intent to return legally and apply for citizenship. After years of navigating the bureaucratic process, he was finally granted U.S. citizenship in 1945, allowing him to operate with greater security. Throughout his long criminal career, Bonanno remarkably avoided legal consequences. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he was never arrested or formally charged with any crime. Even at the infamous Appalachian meeting in 1957, a gathering of major American Mafia bosses to discuss pressing matters like drug trafficking, he escaped without being apprehended by law enforcement, a feat that further elevated his reputation. However, trouble arose following the death of Joe Prophesy in 1962. Prophesy's passing left a power void in the Prophesy crime family, which was subsequently filled by Joe Magliocco. As rivalries and shifting alliances threatened the mafia's balance, 2 powerful bosses, Tommy Lucchese and Carlo Gambino, began consolidating their power. Sensing an opportunity, Bonanno joined forces with Magliocco to eliminate Gambino and Lucchese, hoping to seize control of the Commission, the governing body of the American Mafia, and solidify his dominance. Bonanno's bold plan, however, quickly unraveled. He entrusted the assassination to Joe Colombo, who instead betrayed him, revealing the plot to Gambino and Lucchese. The Commission soon uncovered Bonanno's role in the conspiracy and demanded that he and Magliocco answer for their actions. While Magliocco complied and faced the consequences, Bonanno took a different approach, refusing to submit to questioning. At the same time, Bonanno was also under pressure from law enforcement. He received a subpoena to testify before a grand jury investigating organized crime. Faced with these dual pressures, from the mafia on one side and the legal system on the other, Bonanno decided to disappear from public view. In October 1964, he went into hiding, effectively relinquishing control of his family. In his absence, the Bonanno family's leadership fell into disarray. The Mafia Commission appointed Gaspar di Gregorio to take charge of the family, though the Bonanno faction would soon face a turbulent period marked by internal conflict and violent disputes, known as the Bonanno War. This period would leave lasting scars on the family's stability and Bonanno's legacy in the mafia world. When Joe Bonanno reappeared in May 1966, his sudden return came with a mysterious story. He claimed he had been kidnapped by Peter and Antonino Megadino of the Buffalo crime family, a tale that many believed was fabricated. Regardless of the truth, his reappearance sparked significant attention, and soon after, Bonanno faced legal consequences for failing to attend a grand jury session. Indicted for his absence, he challenged the charges for an impressive 5 years before they were ultimately dismissed in 1971. Upon his return, Bonanno found his crime family in turmoil. The once unified Bonanno organization had fractured into two hostile factions, one side loyal to Bonanno, and the other siding with Gaspar di Gregorio, who had been installed by the commission in Bonanno's absence. Despite the internal discord, Bonanno made attempts to restore cohesion within his family, but the old unity and strength proved elusive. Tensions erupted in violence in 1966 during a sit-down in Brooklyn, where both factions gathered in an attempt to resolve their issues. Although no one died during this meeting, it marked the beginning of a protracted conflict within the family, known as the Bonanno War, which continued to destabilize the organization. Then, in a surprising move, Bonanno did something unprecedented. He announced his retirement from the Mafia in 1968. Such a decision was highly unconventional. Traditionally, members of the Mafia did not simply retire. Walking away from the life usually meant either exile or death, as loyalty to the organization was considered a lifelong commitment. However, Bonanno's reputation as a former boss and his personal pledge to stay out of mafia affairs led the commission to grant him a unique exception. They allowed his retirement but imposed strict conditions. Bonanno was warned that if he ever attempted to meddle in mafia business again, he would face immediate retribution and be killed on sight. This conditional retirement was highly unusual, yet it allowed Bonanno to leave the mafia with his life intact, a rare concession that demonstrated both his influence and the commission's determination to prevent further disruption within the organization. After a long life at the top of organized crime, Joe Bonanno's post-mafia years were far from quiet. For most of his criminal career, Bonanno had avoided arrest, but this record came to an end in 1980 when, at the age of 75, he faced his first conviction. Charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice, Bonanno was accused of attempting to interfere with a grand jury investigation into suspected money laundering operations connected to businesses owned by his sons. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to a year in prison, marking his first time behind bars after decades of evading the law. Then, in 1983, Bonanno took an unprecedented step that would again put him in the spotlight and provoke the mafia's ire. He released an autobiography detailing his life within the mafia, openly sharing insights into his years as a crime boss and the intricate workings of organized crime. This book was a direct violation of Omertà, the mafia's sacred code of silence, which demanded that members keep their dealings secret. But Bonanno didn't stop there. In April of the same year, he appeared on the television program 60 Minutes, where he sat down with journalist Mike Wallace to discuss his past. For a former boss of the American Mafia, this was an astonishing break from tradition, further angering his old associates, who saw it as a flagrant disregard for mafia rules. The following years continued to test Bonanno's resolve. In 1985, during a high-profile racketeering trial targeting the leaders of the five families, including figures like Paul Castellano and Anthony Salerno, U.S. Attorney Rudy Giuliani sought Bonanno's cooperation. Giuliani questioned him specifically about the existence of the Commission, a governing body for the Mafia that Bonanno had referenced in his autobiography. However, Bonanno refused to provide information, holding to his personal code even in the face of legal pressure. His silence led to another imprisonment, this time for 14 months, as he was found in contempt for refusing to testify. After these events, Joe Bonanno largely retreated from the public eye, spending his final years quietly. He passed away from heart failure on May 11, 2002, at the age of 97, leaving behind an extraordinary legacy as one of the last connections to the early days of the American Mafia. His life story remains a unique chapter in the history of organized crime, a tale of ambition, survival, and a surprising final act that few in the Mafia could have imagined.